Hello everyone, welcome to the second lecture on emotional intelligence at workplace. In the previous lecture, we talked about what exactly is emotion and the concept of emotional intelligence and why we need emotional intelligence at work environment. In this lecture, we look at the link between emotional intelligence and organizational variables and outcomes such as occupational stress, workplace violence, and group effectiveness. We also look at how uh, organization can build emotionally intelligent norms at groups. Having an emotionally intelligent individual does not necessarily make for an emotionally intelligent team. Teams' emotional intelligence is more complicated than individual emotional intelligence since teams interact at more levels. So group need to be aware and positively influence its own members' emotion at an individual level. And at a team level, teams needs to be aware and regulate its own emotion and moods. And at the cross-boundary level, teams need to be aware and regulate other groups' emotions. Emotionally intelligent individuals and groups may experience less aggressive behavior and bullying, and they may be better at managing occupational stress, and they may have higher teamwork efficacy. Let's start by looking at the link between emotional intelligence and workplace violence by defining what is bullying. Can be defined as a repeated, persistent negative type behavior toward individuals or group of people, which is characterized by imbalanced power dynamic between an aggressor and their target. An example for this type behavior can be verbal aggression such as gossiping, aversive or organizational politics, such as withholding information or support from specific individuals, and social isolation, and more obvious version of it, which is physical aggression. Bullying causes stress and it's costly for businesses. It can result in stress-related somatic illnesses, decrease in job satisfaction, performance, absenteeism, and leading to individuals leaving the organization. Bullying can be explained by situational factors such as organizational change and restructuring. When the organization go through uh, such changes, it might cause uncertainty and stress to the organization and its members, or it can be caused by the power gap between the supervisor and the subordinate, which lead to supervisor asserting control and dominance over the subordinate. Individuals who have trait anger, that is the tendency to experience more anger than others as their personality, or the ones that they have inability to control stress, or the ones that they have low life satisfaction might end up to be the bully or the victim of bullying. In general, individuals become target of bullying if they have a threatening aggressive behavior or they have a passive behavior. There are not much direct evidences for the link between emotional intelligence and workplace violence. There are some indirect evidences that may count for the link between emotional intelligence and workplace violence. Since individuals with low emotional intelligence tend to have difficulties in interpersonal relationships, they tend to lack empathy and they have poor self-control over angry impulses, and they tend to misinterpret hostility in others, and they have poor emotional control, which all these factors tend to be counted as a direct causes of workplace violence. Organization may be able to decrease bullying by training their individuals' social and emotional skills, and by cultivating it, they can help them to manage their anger better, and more accurately recognize hostility in others. They also can, more importantly, establish an organizational culture that promote emotional intelligence and provide caring organizational climate. Emotional intelligence encourages empathy, pro-social behavior, and positive citizenship behaviors. In addition to workplace violence, occupational stress is another important global problem in organizations. It can have three different sources. Stress can be task related, it can be quantitative overload of the tasks, and it can be qualitative overload. That is, the task is too difficult to do. It can be caused by role confusion, lack of autonomy and deadline and time pressure. It can be also related to personal goals and values of the employees, such as failure to win promotion and disruption between home life work balance. It can be also resulted from a problematic relationship with others at work. Emotional intelligence may decrease occupational stress by influencing the choice of coping strategy and by increasing the effectiveness of the chosen coping strategy. Emotional intelligence helps individuals to respond adaptively to occupational stress by helping them to choose coping strategy that is best fit in their current situational context. In this sense, emotionally intelligent individuals are more able to accurately identify emotions in others and better understand and regulate emotions in oneself and others, which help them in turn to come up with a more effective coping strategy. In the current literature, there are three different categories for coping. First is the problem focused coping, and that the individuals try to directly deal with the problem that caused the stress. For example, before a stressful meeting with the supervisor, the employee try to plan for it, and then they try to gather information and come up with possible ways to solve this problem. The second category, emotion focused coping, is directed at regulating the emotions associated with the stress. For example, individuals try to use humor to decrease the intensity of the emotion, and they try to seek emotional support from a friend, or they try to look at the bright side, or they pray. The third category of coping is when individuals decide to simply avoid the, the stressful situation. For example, they try just to watch TV instead of doing something about the situation, or just avoiding seeing people that cause them have stress, or just drink instead of doing something about it. The difference between problem-focused coping and the two other coping categories is that in the problem-focused coping, individuals think that they can't be anything constructive done to change the stressful situation and it's out of their control. Emotion-focused coping and avoidance coping are adaptive when individuals correctly evaluate and perceive the situation as out of control. There are some times that they can actually do something to change the stressful situation, but they just avoid it, and they just think that emotions that they feel is too much, so they feel like they can't do anything to change the situation. Emotionally intelligent individuals neither suppress nor mask their authentic emotions. Instead, they try to express them in a constructive way, and being open to their emotion and accepting them help them to have better understanding and knowledge of their emotions, which help them to have broader and wider uh, emotion coping strategies, and they often have a stress management techniques in their hand to use. For example, taking a long bath, doing workout or yoga or relaxation, or having an emotional diary to write about how they feel, or using humor and imagining positive pictures in one's mind. One possible way that individuals can use emotional intelligence to cope with occupational stress is to use three-step strategy model. First, they need to acknowledge to their own emotions, try not to avoid or minimize their emotions, and then they try to listen and attend to their emotions and trying to understand what kind of message and information their emotions trying to telling them about what's going on in their environment, and then try to channel this emotional energy in an appropriate and constructive way using their uh, now that we learned about how emotional intelligence may decrease workplace violence and may help with coping with occupational stress, let's learn about how emotional intelligence may help group efficacy. To better understand the emotion dynamic in group, we need to look at the group's three different levels of emotional interactions. We need to understand at the individual level how group interact with its own members' emotions, and at the group level how the group interact with its own group emotions and moods, and at the cross-boundary level how group interact with other individuals and groups' emotions.
So, why groups should apply emotional intelligence? There had been groups with qualified members and access to many resources and a clear mission, but they still end up not being successful. Possible reasons for this might be they didn't felt like they engaged with the task. They couldn't trust each other because they didn't understand each other's perspective and feeling about the whole processes and the tasks. There are three conditions for essential for group effectiveness, which is trust among members, a sense of group identity, and a sense of group efficacy. Establishing emotional intelligence norm help teams to engage with the task wholeheartedly. Emotional intelligence norms support behaviors and attitudes for building trust, sense of group identity, and group efficacy. Having these attitudes and behavior over time become habit and may improve and increase teams' effectiveness. So now let's look at how teams can establish norms that create awareness in its own individual members. There are two ways for this. First, interpersonal understanding and then perspective taking. So, for example, if a team member was fully engaged in the task and they were trying so hard to help the project, but suddenly they stop acting and they stop not getting engaged in it. Sound like look like that they're not that much interested in it. So instead of negatively labeling the team member and quickly judge them, an emotionally intelligent teams try to understand why they're acting this way, and they might say that maybe she or he is defensive because one of the team members recently said something to them, or maybe they're feeling like their idea is not that much or their contribution is not that much considered. So, regarding perspective taking, teams need to listen to every individual's perspective, even the quiet one. They try to avoid quick decisions, and even if the majority of the members reach an agreement, they still try to hear out the objection and the only one that is not agree, and they try to understand what's their perspective. So the goal is here to balance team's cohesion with members' individuality. Groups need to establish norms that help regulating emotion in its own individuals. There are two ways for this. First, teams need to feel comfortable to call on each other when they're doing something they're not supposed to do or acting in a negative way. They need to establish set of rules and use them to point out wrong behavior. And they need to do it in a caring manner. At the group level, team need also to create awareness and help regulating its own group emotions and moods. There are ways for this. First, teams need to evaluate frequently their own performance and they need to be aware of their own weaknesses and strengths. They need to set a time frequently to have discussion about how effective the team is, and they need to seek feedback from other employees and from other organizations. They need to have the capacity to face difficult information and actively seek feedback from others and from outside. Teams need to create resources for working with its own emotions and moods. For example, they need to have a common emotion vocabulary so they understand each other. And they need to have a helpful ways to vent frustration and anger. There are companies that they have space-proof rooms that employees can go there and take out their anger and shout when they're angry. Teams need also to establish emotionally intelligent norms that create awareness of the other entities outside their boundaries. They need to have a organizational understanding about the concern and needs of the other organization. They need to discuss whether their actions are in line with the whole organization culture and policies and how their actions may affect the other teams outside their boundaries. And they need to build a positive relationship with the other teams and establish their uh, a constructive way to frame their and communicate their needs, their own team's needs and accomplishment to the other teams, so they positively influence them their emotions. So they need to ask about their other team needs and even support them to accomplish them in a way that mutually benefit both sides. I end the lecture by an exercise. Please click on this link and watch the movie scene. It's about a conflict between two co-workers. Try to analyze the emotional situation and discuss the situation or the conflict that they're facing, and then try to perceive emotion in their face, their vocal tone, body language, and their behavior, and then try to understand by answering these following questions, and then try to see how they can use their emotions to achieve their goals. So you need to identify what are their goals, each of the sides, and then see how they can use their emotions to achieve their goals peacefully. And then try to see how they can manage their emotions by looking at these strategies that I put here or come up with your own strategy. Thank you everyone for listening to the lecture. Please don't hesitate to ask me if you have any question.